Thank you very much, Christo. Thanks for everybody attending today. I think we all hope to learn a bit more about the implications of Eskom grid type, putting power back into the grid. What are the regulations? What are the regulations regarding much more things that we need to know? We've seen yesterday in the budget speech as well, a lot of things positive towards solar and solar energy. And I think we all need to learn more, and now we can use it in our own businesses, in our own homes, to make life better for all. So hearty word of welcome to all. Thanks, Christo.
Thank you, Jaco. Then Kulani, Kobus, can you perhaps just also give an introductory note? Kulani?
Thank you, Christo. Yeah, thank you very much, Christo. Thank you. I'll just reiterate just some of the words that Jaco has mentioned, that this is a very topical matter currently in the climate of South Africa's energy landscape. We have noted as well the developments from the budget speech yesterday, so we're quite excited just to coming and hearing more on when it comes to just the legislation's limitations and opportunities thereof. I think it is a good opportunity for everyone online to be engaging in this particular platform. So thank you, Christo. Maybe I'll hand over to my chairperson.
Kobus? Okay, if Kobus is struggling on his side, I just want to emphasize that this webinar is being recorded. We will send out a note afterwards, giving a summary of the webinar. If there's any material that we can make available, we will make that material also available. And then the plan is to have regular sessions such as this to keep our members informed. As you all know, the agriculture sector is one of the biggest energy users in the country, but also one of the biggest sectors that struggle a lot and that really face an uphill battle if there's no or if there's extended levels of load shedding. And we need to make plans to ensure the survival of the sector. But we are not the experts. We have invited an expert like Fauré van Schalkwyk to address us this morning. So I really want to extend a warm welcome to you, Fauré, as well as your other colleagues. Please, you can start right away. Over to you.
Great. Thank you for the introduction and for this opportunity, Christy. I think it's great that farmers like yourself try to understand what's happening in the regulation space so that you have a better understanding of the challenges and opportunities. So maybe just a short introduction about myself. I'm an electrical engineer by profession. We focus specifically on providing training to solar PV installers or accredited installers. I think some of you would know the PV Green Card or the P4 from AREP. But we also provide training and technical support to municipal officials. So that's why we're quite familiar with the NRS series, which we will discuss and talk about today. So that entails training and equipping municipalities to process SSEG, or these days embedded generation systems, on their network in a sustainable way. So I see my colleague and partner, Dr. Gerard Botha, is here as well. He's he actually worked at Northwest University. He's now with DNV. But Gerard, I think maybe just a short introduction. I don't know how long you'll be with us, but maybe just a short introduction a bit about yourself. But he has provided. Did he speak by himself? I'll just add if there's something he's missed. Gerard, thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Yes. Okay, so I worked for Eskom for a number of years and was involved with a lot of the NRS documents. But I've been in private practice now for a couple of years and doing consulting, but working with Fauré, I think we make a good team, understanding both sides of the coin, both the customer as well as the the utility side. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Gerard. Appreciate that. Gerard is just shying away, but he was one of the key participants and developers in some of the key regulations and standards that includes the NRS series, like the document which we're going to discuss today. We both are still part of some of the working groups on the NRS level. I was not part of the 2-3 or the 048. Gerard, I know, was part of the 097-2-3, which we will talk about. The bottom line is we do have some insights on the NRS series, which we will discuss or talk about today, and we'll try to share some insights in that regard. So Gerard is here to just slot in if there's something that I've missed. Okay, so let's just jump into today's session. Just want to get my presentation going. We've got load shedding on our side, so if you do lose connection, I might just switch to a different provider, but we'll make it work from there. Could someone just confirm if they can see the presentation?
We can see it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Right, so just to ring fence the discussion for today, we recently mentioned that the 097-2- just want to switch this off. The 097-2-3 has been recently updated. The last edition was in 2014, so that's about 9 years later. It's been updated to make provision for the embedded generation space, where we see a lot of people installing solar PV and making open for systems on the distribution level. A lot of the standards was much more orientated towards big utility scale solar farms, but we see more and more people installing solar PV. So the discussion would be in terms of the changes within this 2-3. And then on a high level, I will talk about the NRS 048-9. That has to do with the load shedding implications. There was just to understand what does that entail, and then how that would impact the agriculture sector when it comes to essentials and critical loads, and what opportunities or challenges there might be. So that would be the discussion for today. If you do have other questions than this, we can, and there's time left, we can definitely talk or entertain them. We're quite informed the energy space. There might be other questions that we might respond to. And then for our Afrikaans farmers, you're also welcome to ask the question in Afrikaans. We'll just respond in English so that everybody can follow. And just a side note, I come from an agriculture space. My dad is a farmer there in the Karoo, in the Fraserburg environment, so I have the farmers are close to heart, so it's great to participate and contribute to our agriculture sector. Right, and I also just would like to give credits to Dr. Botha, who compiled a big portion of this presentation. I just amended it a bit so that it's more aligned to our discussion and for people to follow. Okay, so the first thing is we're going to talk about what has changed. What's been added or removed. We'll just highlight some of the points. And then I'm just going to quickly go through the assessing of the applications. And the intention is not for you to understand and follow exactly how it works, but just to have a bit of appreciation of what the municipalities and Eskom are doing to see if you can connect a certain size system to their network. Then we'll just check in terms of what the commissioning check challenges they've got in terms of to say, okay, do they comply? But how will we check that they comply and stay compliant? And then just talk about what about the existing solar PV systems that's being installed. Now, maybe before we jump into the detail, let's just maybe understand and have an idea of why is there something like the NRS 097-2-3 and what's the purpose. So you'll see that it's called the simplified connection criteria. In other words, whenever you install any form of generation to the network, by law, by the grid code, you're technically supposed to do a grid impact study to make sure that this system can connect to the network. Now, if we had to do that for all of these small residential or even agriculture systems, it would just be detrimental because it's very expensive and very complex. This is some of the work that Dr. Botha is doing in his current company. So the simplified criteria, in a way, eases that process. So it's a very quick and easy way to quickly allow people based on their system size and based on how much they will charge and discharge, which we will talk about now. Now, you might ask, okay, but why? Why are there limitations on the size of the system that we install? Let's just think of the other extreme. If we allow everyone to just install what they want and any size system, you could end up in situations where you overload the network. And then if the network is on overload, not only that customer, but everyone connected to that network could be impacted by that. Either because the power switch is off, the transformer is overloaded, the main circuit breaker trips, and then everyone is without power. So in a way, somebody has to manage who installs what and how big. And I know, for example, in farming cases, where at the end of a very long line, farmer has a lot of money, they make decisions out of emotions. They install a supersized solar system, more than what they need. And it's generating so much power, it's pushing it back into the grid, which is great because we want that. But it's an oversized system. It elevates and picks up the voltage. The transformer trips upstream, and all of the farmers along the line are without power. I'm sure there might be one or two here that would say that we've experienced something similar. And the 2-3 is one of those methods to manage that, to make sure, listen, if we're going to install it, we need to install it in a coordinated way, and we need to install it in a sustainable way. So that just to understand where that comes from and why we're doing that. Okay, so what has changed? So like I've mentioned, it's a simplified utility connection criteria, so it eases the process, and it serves as a guide for simple rules to be applied for LV-connected embedded generators. Now, LV-connected means up to 1,000 volts. Now, in your case, it will typically be 230 volts or 400 volts for the 3-phase customers. Now, applications that do not meet these criteria needs to follow alternative process, which may require detailed network study. So it might be on the farm that you say, well, based on the simplified criteria, I can only install up to 1 megawatt, or based on my connection size, I can only install 200 kilowatt, but I actually want to install more. Does it mean you're not allowed? No, you can install more, but you need to do detailed network studies. Now, I think most of the people here would be Eskom customers, but Eskom or the municipalities would then give you guidance in terms of what this entails if you want to install a larger system than the simplified criteria. Right, now utilities may modify the criteria or add additional criteria to meet their specific requirements considering the network characteristics. Now, why this is important is that even though the 097-2-3 has been updated, it's not going to be enforced by law like a SANS standard. So SANS standard is a South African national standard. It's enforced and promulgated by an act. The NRS series is not a standard. It's actually an industry specification. It's called the National Rationalized Specifications, and municipalities and Eskom can decide if they are going to implement it as it is, or if they're going to adjust the requirements. So just make sure that when you want to apply for a system or get it registered, engage with your municipality or Eskom to confirm if they're going to adhere to the new rules or adjust to the, or keep the old ones, or maybe adjust it to their needs. Okay, so what are the high-level changes? And maybe just to mention, there's some definitions that's existing in the 097-2-3, and I know this might be very technical and high level for the farmers, but just bear with us. I think there's a few concepts that has been added. One is that there's now this maximum charging current. In the past, there was no mention of limitation on charging, so this is now something that has been added. And then there's a new concept of maximum export capacity. The reason being for that is that in the past, it was actually based on the nameplate power rating, so or the maximum size of the embedded generator. So the limitation of the past was the maximum size of the system. Now the approach has gone to, okay, you can install larger, but the limitation is how much you export to the grid. So we'll see and talk about that later on. And then just this concept of utility installed capacity. So this refers to your main circuit breaker size or your transformer size, or your notified maximum demand. So it might be that you've got a larger connection, a larger transformer, but you indicated you're going to use only X amount of kilowatts or kVA, and that would be your notified demand. So what is the capacity supplied by the municipality or Eskom? Okay, so those are the new concepts. Maximum charging, the maximum amount you can export, MEC, the size of your system, your embedded generator system, and then utility installed capacity. Maybe just to make a point here, if it's an off-grid system, off-grid meaning that there's zero Eskom connection, not even to charge, then these criteria would not abide, and a lot of the NRS requirements will fall away. So the systems we're talking about is embedded or grid connected or distribution generation. So it means it needs to be connected to the utility for these requirements to be adhered to or to be used. So what are the key changes? Now, in the past, I think some of you would know for shared feeders, and I don't think most of your farmers will fall into this category. This is more like residential. You're only limited to 25% of your notified maximum demand or 25% of your main circuit breaker size. So you're not allowed to install the physical inverter system you install cannot be more than 25% of your circuit breaker size. So just to give you an example, if it was residential 60 amps, then you were not allowed to install more than 3.6 kilowatts of inverters. Now we know that's a challenge because most inverters residential is about 5 kilowatts or more. So this is a barrier, you know. So and I think that's why it's great that we have this update. For larger customers, that would be you, where you've got a dedicated feeder. So dedicated feeder means you are the only person being fed directly from the transformer, or you're the only person using the transformer. And then you've got a dedicated transformer. You can install up to 75% of your main circuit breaker size. So it's 3 times the size that you are allowed to install. Okay, what has changed? Well, now you can install up to 100%. Now the term NMD has changed now to utility installed capacity. So you can install up to 100% of your main circuit breaker size, your main transformer size. So it allows you to install a much bigger system than in the past. So this is, I think, a big plus for the consumers, but also for the municipalities and utilities, because we need to get that excess energy online. So installing more might provide for that. But there's now new changes. There's a limitation on the export. So you're only limited to export up to 25% for shared feeders, so that's residential, and up to 75% for dedicated. So that's again for the farmers with their own transformer or being supplied directly to the to that. Then we've another limitation. I think this is something that we need to be sensitive about and we need to be aware of, is that there's a charging limitation. So for both shared and dedicated, irrespective, you're only limited to up to 25% of the utility installed capacity, and nothing more than that. So that might be a challenge. Okay, then in terms of balancing, so obviously as soon as you start exporting, then and the exporting is more than 4.6, it needs to be balanced, and then there's a voltage rise limit of 1% on the feeders. I'll show that in a graph just now. Other points, just to highlight again, in the past there was a limitation of 75% of the transformer and 15% of the peak feeder load. This has now changed. Instead of the generator size, is how much you physically export. Sorry, hold on just a moment. Sorry about that. Just the dogs is a bit excited. Anyway, so yeah, so you'll see that the requirements are more or less the same. The only difference is the size of the system compared to how much you export. So again, you're allowed to install up to 100%, but the export limitation would still apply. Okay, so again, I'm just going to go through this on a very high level, just so that you have an appreciation of what the municipalities and Eskom do when somebody applies and wants to get the system approved. Okay, now just to, on a high level, you'll see that here we've got a shared feeder. Shared feeder is like residential, so each house is connected to that feeder or cable coming from a transformer. And a dedicated feeder, and I think most of your farmers would be like this, where directly from the transformer, you have your own supply, and then somewhere you've got your loads connected, and you can also install your own solar system with storage. So for a shared feeder, there's a few steps. The first thing is they need to make sure that the system that they install, the nameplate power rating, is the same size or less than the utility installed capacity. That's your main circuit breaker size. So that's step 1. Step 2, they need to make sure that what you export is not more than 25%. Step 3 is they may need to make sure that when you charge, it's not more than 25% of the installed capacity. And then the check 4 is to make sure that if we add up all these embedded generators on the network, it doesn't exceed 25% of the transformer rating. Now, this might make no sense now. I'll give you some examples with values that might follow going forward. Again, if you don't understand that, that's not the intention. It's just to show you what's happening in the background or the utility side. Dedicated feeder, that would be most of you as farmers. Again, you need to make sure that your system that you install is the same size as your main circuit breaker size or less. You need to make sure that what you export is limited to 75% of your main circuit breaker size. And then what you use to charge the batteries, if you've got batteries, obviously, is limited to 25% of your main circuit breaker size. So these are now new concepts that has kicked in, which wasn't there before. The last check 3 is then to check that your feeder voltage is within the 1% tolerance, because obviously if you have some fluctuating voltages, that means that either your system could switch off or you could start damaging your equipment and appliances in the house. So that's why they need to check that the voltage is acceptable. Okay, right. Yeah, then they go upstream. So once they're done on let's say at your level, they take it upstream. They have to check all the feeders in terms of the transformer, and then on the MV level, they need to make sure that it's still less than 15% of the peak load. Okay, so you can see that there's a lot of stuff happening there, and these are the things that we train and educate the municipalities to deal with. And for your system to be approved, you need to tick all of those boxes going through. So just to give you a bit of an idea. Now, a challenge for the municipalities is, okay, in the past, you were limited to the size of the system, and the system could never charge or discharge more than the size of the system. But now, because you're allowed to install a larger system, it means that the amount that you can export and how much you can use could also be more. So it's very difficult to control that. And that's why we, as from our side, we propose that we really need to consider to have active monitoring for how much they export and how much they charge. And other limitations might include, for example, installing circuit breakers to limit the charging and the discharge rate, which there are some challenges, which I will show to you just now. And then there's various other options. For example, they could install metering, and how when they penalize the or charge the customers for maximum demand, that's when you use a very large amount of power in a short space of time. They could do the same when you export more than you're allowed, or when you charge more than when you're allowed. So these are options we will see in the market going forward. Now, just to show you a visual of how such a system would look like, just hold on. I think most of you would be familiar with such a system. In cases where there's loads separated, and shared feeder meaning it's residential. Load separated means that all your non-essential or non-critical loads, that's your geyser, your stove, all of these things are supplied directly from Eskom, and they are not on the backup or the inverter system. The essential loads, that's your lights, internet, and TV, then would be supplied directly from the inverter charger system, so that if there's an outage, then these loads can still be supplied by the battery. So this is one configuration of how it can be installed. Now, just to show you the concept of import and export, we've got, so import meaning that's when we buy or import power from Eskom, and export is when we've got excess solar power that we want to export back to the utility. Now, in this context, the limitation in terms of the import and export is 25% of your main circuit breaker size, utility installed capacity. Okay, now just let's just give an example so that we understand in values what this means. Now, for a house, it would typically be a 5 kilowatt inverter. Now we say, okay, well, from Eskom, I've got a 60 amp circuit breaker. That means I could get up to 13,800 watts or 13.8 kilowatts. That's what I can get from Eskom. But when it comes to the charging and when it comes to the how much I can export, it's limited to 15 amps. That's 25% of 60. And that's about 3,450 watts or 3.4 kilowatts of charging and charging or exporting power. Now, it might not seem as much, but in this context, it shouldn't be a problem because your big loads can be supplied directly from that supply. So that's not a problem. And to a large extent, it is possible to charge and export on these values if the inverters are set up to do so. Right. Now, where it becomes a challenge is when we have loads combined. In other words, you don't have non-critical loads connected to the supply. You've got all of your loads now being supplied to the inverter. So let's just see what happens. Again, 5 kilowatt inverter, you've got 13.8 kilowatt which you can get from Eskom, but you're only limited to 3.4 kilowatt in terms of charging and exporting. Now, the issue with this is if your loads is going to be much more than that, and you've got a circuit breaker, let's say a 15 amp circuit breaker installed there, that might be a problem. The fortunate thing is that a lot of the new inverters and proper inverters, you can fortunately set it up to say, okay, the charging rates that you charge the batteries and how much you export, you can limit to that. But if the loads are much bigger or more then the 15 amps, the inverter will utilize that from the supply. So this is something that we need to consider. And if your systems are not set up like this already, we really need to consider going that route to make sure that we make provision for the network. Okay, so this is this was for a shared feeder where it's limited to for single phase. Shared feeders are typically single phase. And if we look at a dedicated feeder, 3-phase set up. So let's say we've got a 100 kilowatt inverter. So this is now like on a farm. We've got is a 125 amp 3-phase connection. So that's like 86 kilowatts of capacity that we can get from Eskom. Now we say, okay, well, this is the size system I've got installed. This is the size of the connection. Now the challenge is, okay, well, if I'm going to export or import, I've got a limitation there. I cannot charge more than 30 amps and I cannot export more than the 90 amps. Why 90 amps? Because I'm allowed to export up to 75%, but what I charge is only 25%. So these are the things that we need to keep in mind in terms of the limitations with the new regulations. Now the question would be, okay, but I've already got a system installed. It's already approved. So why should I go back? Do I need approval again? And the answer is no. If your system is already approved with the new updated regulations, you should be fine, because as long as you adhere to the size of the system, which is a little bit more conservative, you shouldn't have a problem in terms of exporting and charging. Okay, right. Then I think the only thing that might kick in might be the charging. So there might be a limitation in terms of the charging, but in terms of the export and the size of your system, it should be fine. Okay, I'm just checking now for time. Christy, would you like us to discuss that quickly before we go to the 048-9? I think that might be a little bit more constructive before we switch gears.
Yeah, I think if there's any questions that people would like to ask you at this point in time, whether it's in English or Afrikaans, they're more than welcome to do so. They can also leave a question in the chat box. If you pick up anything in there, they're also welcome to put it in there. Anyone that would like to ask a particular question on what Fauré has raised at this point?
While we're waiting for questions, Gerard, is there anything that you wanted to add or expand on?
No, thank you. You did a good job, Fauré.
Great, thank you, Gerard.
Okay, I don't see any hands, so please proceed.
Let's do that then. Thank you, Christy. Okay, so the NRS 048-9 is a guideline which, again, Eskom and the municipalities use when it comes to load shedding or demand reduction in the context of when our network is under constraint, which I think everybody is now more familiar with, as it's a known concept and term in the everyday household these days. So just to explain exactly what does this specification say when it comes to critical and essential loads, and where does the agriculture sector fit into this? Because if I know that farmers, if they had the opportunity to be exempted from load shedding, that would be great. And that's why we had a look at it, and Gerard also provided some inputs in terms of to understand what does the current specification say in that regard. Right, so let's just start with the concept of essential loads. So essential load requirements is the minimum customer load requirement. In other words, they might be saying, okay, you're an essential load, but you need to reduce how much you are consuming, or the duration of the supply would be shortened. And this is to avoid a direct or significant impact on the safety of people, the environment, and the physical plant or equipment for nationally critical products, and which has been specifically notified as such by the customer to the licensee. So I think this is the first thing. If you as a customer have not already indicated to the licensee, so that's not Eskom or the municipality because they've got a distribution license, if you have not already notified them to say I'm an essential load or critical load, this is something that we need to think about. Now, what does essential load requirements entail? Essential load requirements may be subject to verification by the licensee in the terms of following criteria. So if you want to be essential load, it needs to be for critical safety, critical environment impact, and then critical, or when you have to produce a critical national product, for example, producing electricity. Customers, sorry, I just want to change this. Customers So customers with essential load requirements shall ensure that appropriate backup systems are in place, as restoration times cannot be guaranteed for various possible system emergencies that could occur. Now, based on our own interpretation, we foresee that the agriculture sector would fall under the essential load section and not critical loads. We'll talk about that just now. And that's why this is something that we want to highlight. I think a lot of farmers has already done this, but if you haven't done so now, you might be happy that you didn't yet because of the tax incentive that's kicking in, the 125% for businesses that I think starts on the 1st of March. So you might get that tax benefit if you are going to install some form of backup system for business purposes. Okay, right. So when it comes to critical loads, the guidelines on appropriate treatment of critical loads and essential loads, we spoke about that just now, is that with critical loads, loads that should as far as possible be protected from the impact of load shedding, that's I think what we all want, or the loss of supply in order to either maintain the operational integrity of the power system or to avoid a cascading impact on public infrastructure. So let's continue. Identified critical loads, and additional may be motivated, you see, includes public transport, commuter rail and airports, water pumping for power station requirements and portable water, sewage, refineries and fuel pipelines, coal mines supplying power stations, critical load associated with essential services like the police and firefighting, telecommunication infrastructure, traffic lights, sports stadiums, and the list goes on. Although I've seen a lot of traffic lights these days being off. What I can say, staying in George, is that I've seen how the sewage plants and even the traffic lights, how they supplied backup systems, power systems for these essential or critical loads, which is really great to see happening. We need to see more of that. Okay, the treatment of critical loads includes exclusion from load shedding schedules and curtailment requirements. So that's obviously what we want to achieve. It's okay, can we be excluded from load shedding if we are a critical load? Curtailment, we're not severely impacted by such curtailment. So it might be that they say, we're not going to switch you off, but we do require you to reduce your consumption. We see this, for example, with your very large power consumers. The specific time of the day that these loads are shed. So it might be that they say, okay, we're not going to put you under the standard load shedding schedule, but we're going to shed you in times when it's not going to have an impact. So it might be that farmers say we normally do irrigation, during the day. At nighttime would be a better time to switch off, or the other way around. Interventions with the installation. So, for example, installing backup systems, and then protocols for interaction between these customers and the operating and utility. So I think this is something that will happen a little bit more intense. I mean, as for the general customer, we're informed about load shedding schedules. So that's one way of interacting with us, but it might be a little bit more one-on-one for farmers if they did have the opportunity. Now, what about agriculture? Now, within this document, 8.6.5.6, agriculture water schemes, water supply systems to agriculture areas shall in principle be included in load shedding in periods of drought and declaration of disaster in terms of the Disaster Management Act. Now, the first time when I read this, I thought, oh, great, maybe that's an opportunity because we've got a state of disaster at the moment, but that's not in context of drought. So it's more in the context of energy provision. So this is, I think, is the it's more applicable in the context if we have a drought situation. And then based on that, it may allow exclusion from the schedules for the duration of the declared disaster, subject to the need for this being clearly identified. So even if this makes provision for that, they still need to engage with NERSA or the relevant authorities to say, would we be able to be exempted? Alphonse, I see you've got your hand up. You want to ask a question?
Yes, and I'm mainly from Fallers irrigation area, and I've got a lot of questions, but the first one referring to this point, we are going into El Nino phase again. So currently everybody is moaning around about a lot of water, but this is the end of the season. So will a Fallers irrigation scheme release on power cuttings?
Sorry, Alphonse, you broke up a bit. I just want to understand, are you talking about if there's like a drought situation, that if you were going to be exempted? Is that what you're asking for?
Correct. Sorry for the bad reception. That's because of the power.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now we're going into El Nino phase in the whole South Africa. So agriculture schemes like FALAR will be on much bigger strain within a year's time period.
Okay, great. No, thank you, Alphonse. I think what we just need to keep in mind is if we look at the current specification, in general, it doesn't really make provision for agriculture as a critical load. And in that context, they are of the view that they should participate in the load shedding. However, the only scenario where they say agriculture water schemes can be considered to be exempted is in the context of a drought and if a disaster was declared. So those are two things that need to go hand in hand. And you still will need to be make contact with your licensee and or NERSA, and Gert can confirm in terms of that, to see can you be listed as a critical load. That's one option. Or the other option is to say in the context of the disaster that's been declared to be exempted from load shedding. So it's a very unique and specific case where you would be able to do that. Our interpretation of the 048 in general is that agriculture might fall under the essential load section. And for that, it means that you might still need to be exposed to load shedding. Great. Thank you, Alphonse. Great. Now, our other point is national critical product. So where the destruction or damage to a plant, equipment, or facilities would disrupt production of national critical products. Now, I mean, as farmers, we immediately like, that's us, you know. The minimum power required to prevent such damage might be considered as an essential load requirement. Now, I want to point out, if you go to the list of what this entails, you'll see critical products include aspects like water, energy, petroleum, and so on. So food, unfortunately, not being one of them as it stands. Now, NERSA shall in any dispute rule of the nature of a product being considered as a national critical product or not. So I think that's where if the farmers can see if they can engage with the relevant authorities like NERSA to see what agriculture produce might be seen as a national critical product, but at this stage it's not listed. Now, in terms of the fundamentals in terms of this document, you'll see that all customers shall be entitled to apply for critical load status. So it is possible for any customer to apply for that. Obviously, it would be up to the licensee and or NERSA to see if they can list you as a critical load status. And this is something else I think we should keep in mind. Even though that in principle, they could say, okay, we will allow you, we will make you critical load. The question is, does the infrastructure allow for that? Would the infrastructure make it possible for you to not be shedded? What do I mean with that? It might be that there's a substation or transformer supplying multiple farmers or multiple consumers. If you want to be exempted as a specific person to be exempted from the load shedding, the challenge is, would Eskom or the municipality be able to keep your power on, but switch it off for the rest? And that's what's been listed here. In the case of critical loads not identified by the 048, licensees and customers shall cooperate in addressing the requirements of these loads by considering at least the following alternatives. Exclusion from load shedding schedules and curtailment requirements. This shall in principle be limited to cases where the load can be isolated, so that other loads that should not be shed are not also protected from the schedule. So we need to understand there's practical challenges if you are going to say, okay, but we want to be exempted from load shedding, but would it technically be possible? Because they won't necessarily have the means or the manpower to do that. Exclusion from load shedding is possible where the customer load is supplied directly, not one or several loads are given feeders, or where smart metering or load limiting technologies have been installed on all loads to the feeder. On all the loads to the feeder. So we need to think about, if we want to go this route, it might be that we need to make some network upgrades or changes which will allow you to be able to do that. So that's a technical challenge if farmers were to consider to be exempted in that regard. I think that's my last slide. Let's just see the question. It will be important to find a drought, especially in certain areas affected. Is a drought seen as a national or regional event? Kobus, I'm not sure. I have seen that sometimes they've indicated droughts in a regional environment. I've seen this happening in various areas of the country, including the Northern Cape and the Karoo. But if that is suffice under this document, not a question, because my understanding of that disaster might be more of a national nature, but I'm going to be honest, I'm not sure. Gerard, is there any other points you might want to add, or correct me if I've got a misinterpretation of something?
I think a regional disaster would suffice.
Okay.
I don't think in this case it would need to be national. But yes, load shedding is a very emotional subject for everybody in this country, and I think everybody would actually consider the merits and want to accommodate people in terms of, especially, I mean, food is a critical national product in most people's minds. Everybody needs food. But there might be other better technical solutions. So I think one needs to consider going forward, so that we know this, but let's look at the entire picture and see what we can do together that will be to the benefit of the country as a whole as well, not just the farmers. I see Alphonse has raised his hand.
Yes, thank you, Gerard. Alphonse, before I take your question, yes, and I think maybe just to highlight to you all, I think obviously sometimes we tend to look at our own situation in isolation, and we're not aware of how other industries are impacted and losing, I want to say, you know, losing millions to billions of rands due to being load shedded, even partially load shedded. Gerard, I think you made the point about the aluminium smelters that's losing in terms of the quality of the metals because of power interruptions, and then they're only getting like a quarter of the value of the metal when they need to sell it, and we're not talking small money here, and these are sites consuming, what did you say, 1.3 gigawatts of power. You know, it's like a power station on its own. So we need to understand, I mean, these people are also curtailed, they're also limited in terms of load shedding. So I think the point that Gerard raised is quite important, that we need to look at holistically what can be done. Great, thank you. Alphonse, you had your hand up. You want to just add to that?
Yes. I've got a question. We at Fallers, we've set up a committee, and we're looking into already down the way to put the 60 MVA power supply system in with the support of Nedbank, already approved financing about 700 million. Now, my question will be to Agri SA. We need to be cut off from the Eskom system, and using the Eskom network in Fallers irrigation scheme, but it's going to be challenging from NERSA side. So what we want to do is not get any politics involved, so just only get the irrigation area, the farmers, 1,350 farmers involved. The value of the area is 14 billion rand of the land value. That is currently under bonds with a local bank like Nedbank, FNB, and as going forward. And the value of the irrigation scheme is getting lower because of the power supply. Everybody know that. So we want to shortcut the whole situation, but we need help from some of the institutes, and will be the banks, and we want to go to Christie and Agri SA, said help us sitting around the table with NERSA and Eskom, and allowing us to put 100% into our own system. So because we are only allowed to put 15%, 20% into the grid currently. So the grid will not work for us. We have to be cut off. And then when we've got in blocks, it will be 12 blocks. Everybody have a 3 to 4 MVA system already in, and then we can wheel into Eskom. Is that something possible that you guys can help us with? Because we are already on the down the road with the whole plan and investigating this system.
Alphonse, that was a question to Agri SA, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, I don't see Krista online. Krista, are you online?
Yes, I'm online, but Kalani, if you perhaps can assist
Yeah.
also and see whether any of our other people can assist and shed some light on that question.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think as Agri SA, we are on the same page on principle. And this also speaks to some of the work that Agri SA has already taken upon themselves with all the engagements that we're having with the relevant stakeholders, be it Eskom and now with the regulator, with NERSA. These are some of the things that we investigate in some of the engagements that we're having with them to see how best possible can we ensure that there's some sort of support from a legislation point of view and lowering of the red tapes to allow for farmers to be cushioned from this matter. I don't want to belabor the point and just go on and on, but this is the kind of the work that we are currently doing as Agri SA. I would maybe suggest that, Alphonse, if maybe we can have an offline chat about this just to see how we can further assist in terms of through the correct processes and lines. Thank you, Christo.
Kulani, thank you. Just send me your details and then I contact you. Thank you.
Thanks, Kalani. Fauré, I saw another hand.
Yes. I'm gonna just maybe to respond before we go to the next hand. Alphonse, just a point I want to make, and Gerard, you can confirm this. If you're going to supply your own power and there's no Eskom connection, I mean, it might be that you want to use Eskom infrastructure. That obviously you will need to engage with Eskom. But if it's totally separated and you have your own infrastructure and your own generation, according to law and legislation, there's nothing preventing you from doing that. The licensing requirements has fallen away. The registration requirements has fallen away. Because I think the only place where, a lot of that has changed. I think the only place might be, Gerard, now you need to help me here. I think there might be a NERSA registration if there's a point of supply. But if that's disconnected or switched off or not there anymore, then you've got a lot of flexibility to do your own thing. That's on the one side. On the other side, I think, again, we need to think about, this updating of the 2-3 allows people to install more. And it allows you, in essence, to get more energy on the network. And that's one thing, as a community of your farmers, it's great that you would be able to get this generation online. But if you have excess power that you're not using, it would be beneficial to the country if this could be fed into the grid. That's the one thing. And the other benefit is, yes, you can have a plant that's operating 80-90% independently. But in times when there's insufficient solar or insufficient supply, or your consumption is just higher than normal, in that 10 or 20% of the time, you could pull in Eskom to supply power. So you have like a symbiosis relationship between the two. So just consider that before you totally go off grid and put Eskom aside. I am aware of Eskom's challenges. I am aware of their legislation and all of that. But I think at least give them the opportunity to say, listen, we've got this thing that we're going to do. Let's get to the table and get something that would work for all parties, because we want to help the network and our co-farmers that's also on the Eskom network. But it needs to make sense for you as well. I'm not saying that you have to connect with Eskom, but that's just something to consider, because there's other factors playing a role as well. Gerard, you maybe want to just point into that. I don't know, what's your view?
Okay. Yes, if you're not connected to the Eskom grid anymore, then you still need to inform Eskom, as a backup system needs to be. They have to be informed. That's in terms of the wiring regulations.
Correct.
The biggest concern that I have in terms of that is that, in essence, what I hear is that you would like to use Eskom infrastructure still, and there are certain licensing conditions and the way the Electricity Regulation Act is set up that might make that very difficult, because those distribution lines, the overhead lines, runs over several other properties, and that becomes a regulatory issue that also needs to be resolved. I'm not saying it's not possible, but it's definitely something that's also going to take quite a bit of time and will require NERSA's involvement.
Great. Thank you for that, Gerard. Okay, so I think we won't be able to resolve it today, but it's good to just highlight those points to make an informed decision. Great. Thank you, Gerard. Next person, I think, was Walter, and then Kobus. Walter Visser? Walter?
Yeah, thanks. I just want to ask a very high-level question. I think we've all seen that the answer is probably not getting exemption for specific industries. The answer lies in generation. Given these new incentives, what sort of adoption do we need? And you know, one could probably do the calculation to be able to generate this sort of 6,000 megawatts we short of at the moment, 7,000. Has someone done very high level calculations? Because we all know that's the answer. I don't think Eskom is going to be able to come to the party in the next 4 or 5 years at least. Yeah, and obviously all these practicals, you know, given the 25% export or 75 from the dedicated guys, has someone done some calculations on that?
Yeah, Walter, I don't have any numbers. And yes, I think for most of the farmers, it would be the 75% category. The 25% export would be residential and smaller holdings. I think it's a combination of, there's a lot of large customers, including mines, installing and realizing hundreds of megawatts of solar PV. And there's a big pipeline of, I think there was already planned something like 9 gigawatts of planned embedded generation coming online. And we're not talking about the reprogram, you know, the big utility scale solar farms. So, and these are projects we are aware of. I think there's a lot of these installations that's being installed that we has not been recorded and has been realized in the past few years. Because what we need to keep in mind is in the past, we had an issue in terms of capacity. But now we have an issue about capacity and energy, not just capacity. So any extra or additional energy on the grid is beneficial to the grid. And that's why I think these updates is great, because that allows for larger generation and getting more export online, which we really need. But I don't have specific numbers in the calculations of what needs to happen. My opinion is, I think we'll see much bigger and faster results from the private industry than from government. And government, to a large extent, has changed legislation and regulations to allow for this. I just think that the public is not necessarily aware of it. But that plus the financial incentives is all good things. Are there challenges? Yes, there's definitely some challenges still, but it's definitely much more easier than it was, I want to say, 2 or 3 years ago, with the ERA being updated and these NRS documents. So if you ask me, I think let's just let the private industry do their thing, and let Eskom and the municipalities play a role in terms of facilitating it. Because, like I said in the beginning, we can't just allow everyone to install any size they want and what they want. So I don't know if there's anyone else that maybe has an answer or that, or Gerard, if you've got a point. Okay, seems like we're good. Okay, so I hope that's fine, Walter. Kobus, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Fauré. I just want to respond to the request from Alphonse Visser in terms of the commercial banks to participate, be it my discussions with Eskom or NERSA. I think it's a very valid request, and I think it's something that we would most definitely consider. So I'd like to extend a hand to Alphonse to say, please reach out to me. Make a proposal. We can also consider to share it at BASA, the Banking Association, at the Agricultural Committee, and see from a BASA perspective if we can, how can we support. Thanks.
Kobus, thank you. Just give me your contact details, please, on the chat board.
I'll do so. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Kobus. Any other questions? I see we've got like 4 minutes left. Even if it's maybe a question not related to what's been presented.
Fauré.
Yes.
It's Christian Verkel speaking. I just want to ask you, do you know what the legislation will be on adding a product? Because Alphonse also mentioned it earlier, that we're going into an El Nino phase, and that is going to lead to more droughts and smaller crops on dry land versus irrigation. And in drier towns, irrigation is needed for food security. So do you know what the possible policies would be on adding a product to the critical product list?
Yeah, I told Gerard that I think this might be a specific question, and to what I mean, it's one thing to request or require for it, but the question is, will it have any chance of being approved? And for that, I think one needs to maybe engage with some of the people that's actively involved with developing this specification. I think, Gerard, you proposed Marcus Kneen. I don't have his contact details. I think it's something to consider. But to be honest, I have no idea what the prospects of that would be. I think the best would be is to start the process and start the engagement. And I think this is one thing that we need to realize, is that this is not a one-man show where there's one desk. If you go there, you get a clear answer and you proceed. There's multiple role players. And I think we're treading in an environment that's unknown. So engaging with the right people and just asking and say, you know, what's the process? Is it the possibility, or what motivation do we need to provide to be excluded? That would be part of the investigation, because the second part is, does your network allow for that? Because when they do exempt you, you know, is it going to be practical that they don't shed other people or exempt shedding, which actually should be shedded? So I don't have a feeling for that, but it might make sense to engage and involve some of the people that are specifically involved with the 048-9 development. Gerard and I, we were not part of that, but we have an idea what's in the document.
Fauré?
Yes, Gerard.
Just before I leave, and sorry I have to leave now, the 048 Part 9 specifically makes provision for the drought conditions when a state of disaster has been declared. So I don't think that's going to be too difficult from the approval part to get that in place and be prepared for it. The critical part is going to be what is physically possible and how much more manpower is it actually going to take to implement it. And for that, one will have to start making plans as soon as possible, so that Eskom as well can say, okay, but let's do these updates or changes to the network to enable us to do that. And yes, that can take years, given whatever is happening at Eskom. So yes, I think that's a worthwhile thing to investigate, so that everything is in place when we sit with that scenario, and that we can then implement it.
Agree. Thank you very much, Gerard. And thank you for being available. Gerard has a triple booking this morning, but he made some time or made it possible to attend. So thank you for your participation. And I think there's a few that also needs to leave. Chair, can I give over to you?
Thank you very much. I think this is part of a series that we would like to launch, yes, it's highly technical. I always tell my wife, yes, I'll change the light bulb, but that's how far I will go with, getting my hands dirty when it comes to electricity, etc. But our farmers, as you've heard, some of them are planning their own schemes. Some of them wants to put up their own systems. And I think it's important. I think the agriculture sector can play a massive role in assisting the country in terms of power supply. But we need to do it according to the book, and we need to ensure that we do so responsibly. And then the funders are there. This morning, we've got a number of financial institutions also online. So yes, our farmers are more than welcome to engage with Kulani. He's the head of our Center of Excellence. And then Kulani will liaise with your office as well, if we need you again in future to come and just give us some technical feedback on these kinds of developments. So thank you very much. We really appreciate your presence here this morning and the time that you spent with us. And to all of the people that are online, thank you very much for showing interest. Hope everything goes well. That we will be able to overcome these challenges as long as we network properly and we stand together, and we've got experts like yourself that are willing to spend time with us to just guide us. Thank you very much.
A pleasure, Chris, and thank you for arranging this event.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye.
Tot ziens.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.